Sunshine, she's here. You can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space with the air, like I don't care, baby. By the way.
Well, Thomas, thank you very much. And maybe we should have asked who of you has Generation Y at home, because I guess more of you would have raised your hands. Now, in order to speak about Generation Y, I would like to invite you to look back together with me. And these are my parents. And by the way, Denis and me, we did not talk before our talks about putting our family into the talks. So this is pure coincidence. Now, when my parents joined the workforce, there was a simple deal between companies and their employees. It was their dedication and loyalty for lifelong employment. Work back then was means of regaining stability and building sound foundations for families. Work basically was the core of life. And this, by the way, is the foundation of a lot of companies. A lot of things have changed till then. The lifelong employment deal has been canceled, by the way, from both sides. Companies have become more complex, just like markets have become more complex. But yet we live in wealthy and prosperous times, so there's a lot more room for the individual and their wishes and needs, and work today is part of life. Now, this is my daughter. In 2020, she will be 18. So in theory, she'll be ready to join the workforce. In reality, I sometimes doubt that as a father, but in theory, she will be. And the question is, what will companies, what will working life be like then? And this is what I would like to talk to you about. One of the groups said to have the major influence on the future of organizations are the so-called millennials, also known as Generation Y. Now, who are they? These are the individuals born between 1980 and roughly 2000. So they are 20 to 30 years old and by now either leaving schools or universities or making their first career steps in your organization. They're well educated and absolutely technology savvy. And in order to understand the influence they might have on organizations, we have to have a look at how they look at the world. Back when my parents joined the working world, it was more about the organization and achieving a greater goal. Now, for millennials, for this generation, it's more about the individual and their achievements. Living a self-determined life is the ultimate value they have. They were well brought up. They're your children, children of the baby boomers. And they have an inherent feeling of life, deserving a good life. So striving for a good, perfect life is exactly their aim. As I said, they're absolute technology savvy, and they have an understanding technology is here to help me. They're perfect networkers. And what's interesting is that does not only mean 500 Facebook friends, as we heard, but they're leveraging their networks to solve problems. Work and life is no contradiction to them. And this is why I don't like the word work-life balance. Just as they expect to update their Facebook status during working hours, they're absolutely willing to check emails and reply on weekends or work hard and long on presentations in the evening. In general, they're a very optimistic generation, and that is interesting. Research told us that even among young unemployed people in Southern Europe, they remain optimistic about their personal future even though they're really in doubt about the future of their countries. Now, how will this affect organizations? In a couple of ways, and I try to depict the three most important ones from my point of view. One, you will experience the end of loyalty in organizations. Motivation by making sense will become much more important. And third, education will become a competitive factor. Let me expand on that. What do I mean with end of loyalty? Well, this is a study, an international study done by PricewaterhouseCoopers, a subsequent study in 2008 and 2011 among millennials, and they were asked, how many employees do we expect to have? And we see a significant increase of the ones saying more than 6, and already a dramatic fall among those stating, well, 2 to 5 employers. And this is where the demographic change comes into play. Daniel Hager mentioned it, war for talent. As the workforce becomes more scarce, the competition among companies will dramatically increase for talent. Now that undermines the concept of loyalty, because switching jobs will become much more easy for employees, and hence, that is a war you can't win. We're waiting, or we are seeing a shift in the labor market from a company-driven market to a candidate-driven market. People will be able to easily switch jobs or choose the employer they most like. Just like we have that situation in some areas or segments already. If we look at China, it's similar. If we look at apprenticeship in Germany, it's a tough competition for the best apprentices. And hence, we move over to motivation by making sense, because as the workforce is getting more scarce and loyalty is sinking, retention of employees becomes more important. Now, how do you do that with Generation Y? Leadership by command and control is a dinosaur. That doesn't work. And especially doesn't work with Generation Y because they were raised in a very participative way, and they're simply used to eye-level discussions. And I can only build on what Daniel Hager said with leadership. Leadership will become much more demanding. It almost becomes a democratic act where you have to justify your decisions. Generation Y wants to understand the big picture. They want to be included. They want to understand their share and their contribution in achieving the big picture. They crave for constant feedback, and I'm sure the ones that are direct managers of Generation Y will support me in that, because they not only want to hear, they want to hear that they are doing a good job, even if they are simply doing their job. So the old German saying, nicht gerügt ist genug gelobt, which translates into, well, not complained is enough of appreciation, doesn't work with them. They demand transparency in information. I mean, come on, folks, these kids grew up with Wikipedia. And this is what they expect in the working world as well. And last but not least, they want to see sense in the tasks they are doing or in the aims of the company. They want to buy into it. Then they are willing and ready and able to absolutely perform, but they must see the sense. Education, and it is my sincerest belief, will become a competitive factor for you in business. And here again, I would like to remind you of demographic change. If you have trouble filling your gaps in the workforce, and this will increasingly so happen. In 2010, we had the turning point in the European Union where more people retired than left schools. We might not notice that at the moment, but this will have a dramatic impact. And this is, no matter what scenario you're looking at, this is not going to go away. So that means that companies will need to draw into segments they have not yet tapped into. And even though we say Generation Y is well educated, there's about 20% that are not ready for employment market. They are undereducated. And companies will need to fill this gap and invest in their education to fill their gaps. Also, you might go to other countries or draw people from other countries to fill your gaps in your country. And I heard this morning that the Hager Foundation has a very nice project with young unemployed people in Spain, which I think is brilliant. But each of you who has an expatriate on their team knows that having someone from another country requires a lot more onboarding, training on the job, explanation. And this is nothing else but education. And even if you hire in your country, you will have to invest in the education of Generation Y because schools and universities have trouble keeping up with the pace of technological and market development. That requires a lot more training on the job. That's not the only reason. There's one more. I spoke about retention. This is a set study from PwC again, and asked about influencing factors for job choice. Personal development by far beat all of the other factors. So Generation Y expects personal development, personal perspective education measures, and that, good news is also a means for you to retain them in your company. So where does this leave us? I think it all comes down to one thing, and this is this. It is my sincerest belief that successful companies in the future will become much more flexible. And let me show you some of the aspects. Working hours. Now, I believe none of you is running on none of you or companies are running on a 9-to-5 schedule only. But it might be even more than that. Now, there's a small German company here from the south of Germany near Stuttgart. It's called Trumpf, the world market leader in sheet metal fabrication and industrial lasers. What they did a couple of years ago, they introduced a working time model for their employees that allows their employees to choose every 2 years the total amount of weekly working hours from 15 to 40 for the next 24 months. So they can choose and be flexible about their total working hours, no matter whether it's in production or management. And you know what? This has been very, very successful against the doubts both of the management and the Works Council. And that tells you something. So, flexibility in working time, flexibility also in working place. I know this is not possible for each job, so speaking about production, difficult, but I believe that any desk-related work does not necessarily require presence. Flexibility in tasks. Generation Y wants diversification in order to learn new things also. So adding up to their jobs, projects, or extra tasks is another means of, you could say, keeping them entertained. But it's also a way of educating them and retaining them. Same goes for career paths. They're interested in cross-functional moves, cross-border moves, another very brilliant retention factor. The time for one training fits all is over. So education, it's my belief, will have to be much more tailored to the individual needs and demands of employees. And it even expands down to benefits. So financial benefits is one thing. What we see first companies experimenting with time, giving out extra vacation days. And time, for instance, is something that's much more precious to Generation Y than money. But goes beyond that. Also, again, education, companies supporting PhD or MBAs or masters, is something you could also think of as a benefit. And I'm sure Hager has a car policy, a company car policy. Huh? You do. You know what? And that is mostly true for companies in urban areas. We see the first car policies that include bicycles, company bicycles. So you might think about that. I mean, you could go into e-bikes for at least and add some funky amendments from Hager to it. So this is what I mean with flexibility. You have to cater to much more different demands in a flexible way in order to retain your people. So Generation Y will influence your organization no matter what. The only question is, how are you going to change? Thank you very much.
Thank you.